Okay, so we'll start here with students here with messages, questions. When I come on, Rodney.
Is yours long?
Mine is just about what the dhikr is.
Oh, that's mine too.
Yeah,
So, okay. The question
That's
is, what is the dhikr for this surah?
I don't have one.
Whoa.
Allahu Akbar?
I thought, yeah.
Yeah, I thought when you said Allahu Akbar.
I don't have one. I didn't. This was not among the surah that I delved into the meaning of with dhikr. And I long wondered if it's just because I haven't done it, or if it's because it's among the very early revelations of the Quran. And I had told myself I'm going to try to answer this question before this halaqah, and I didn't. So I just didn't get to it. So if I do figure it out afterwards, I'll tell you.
Question?
I've got a few questions, but I'll ask just one. Last night, Sheikh, you said to flag up if we covered something in the pre-halaqah that we then don't cover it.
Yeah.
Today. We touched upon briefly last night the connection between Muddaththir and Fatiha in the structure.
Right.
So.
Yeah, this is the connection between Muddaththir and Fatiha, and this is a very interesting question, because Al-Muddaththir is revealed before Al-Fatiha, and the surah that were revealed before Al-Fatiha, and there are not many. There are only a few of them, and namely the candidates as surah revealed before Al-Fatiha are Al-Alaq, Al-Qalam, and Al-Muddaththir, and Al-Muzammil. Now, it is possible that it is really only Al-Alaq and Al-Muddaththir and Al-Muzammil, and that it is possible that Al-Qalam was revealed after Al-Fatiha. Because there's some... so at least, for certain, it is 3. And then that begs the question, do structurally and thematically, can we find the same core elements of Al-Fatiha in these 3 surah? You know, instead of answering it, I would actually like to know what you guys think first. So, take it, reflect on it, and tell me what you think, and then I'll tell you what I think. Yeah. So just look at the Fatiha and look at the various elements of Al-Fatiha and see if you can find these same elements in Muddaththir, in Muzammil, and Alaq. And let me know what you think.
It was a question, it's not an answer to that.
No.
it's a question. You can have it.
They'll go ponder it and come back.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions. One is, you've said before that Surah Al-Fatiha has a key to most of, or all of the other surah. And from the numerology aspect, from the 19, if you were a person who considered Surah Al-Fatiha to have 6 verses instead of 7, would that also be the 6 times 19 to equal 114?
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that.
And then the second question I have is that because the Quran, I mean, this isn't the only surah that makes somewhat of a reference to a person at the time period. Like you said, you know, Tabbat yada Abi Lahab wa Tab, etc.
Yeah.
My question is, do you think that commentators of the Quran or people who've, like, you know, tried to find anecdotes, because to understand the Quran you have to understand it during the time period that it was revealed, and it's only like more than likely that it would be referring to people of the time or how they were acting or whatever the case is, but it seems to be far more compelling to look at it through an individualistic lens. Like these types of verses, it's far more compelling to me that the ayahs themselves would be referring to a personal journey than they would be to like an anecdotal personality of another individual. Because I think that would be completely to the opposite of what it was intended to like accomplish. If you're constantly looking at other people during that time period, it's really easy to separate yourself and say, you know, they're clearly worse people than I would have been. That's so, you know, their moral character is terrible. I would never be that type of person, and it's far harder to look inward than it is other ways. Is there something to be said about the fact that the commentaries tend to attempt to draw connection to people of the time period far more than it is like an attempt to look inward and find steps to actually like demolishing the ego and the self?
Okay, so the first question about numerology, I mean, I had never thought of that. It's interesting that 6 times 19 is equal 114. The ayat of al-Fatiha and so on. But that's really interesting. But the second element, you know, I'm just very hesitant to say the commentaries because there are the tafsirs like Tabari or like Ibn Kathir. Tabari clearly collects reports. Tabari very methodology was that he used the very earliest commentaries in which he receives transmissions, and he just reports what various transmissions, including a great deal of transmissions that attribute hadith to the Prophet, that a good chunk of which are problematic. And someone like Ibn Kathir is also very wedded to the Naqli methodology where you're just getting transmissions. But the difficulty is that I find that a lot of modern Muslims, and now, you know, so many tafsir are available, just don't know how to read the text. So they will look at something like Tafsir Mataridi, for instance, or someone like Ibn Ajiba, or even someone like Razi, and they'll find the report about Al-Walid ibn Mughira, for instance, and they will often, and I've come this again and again with so many students, they will not even notice the passage that talks about, for instance, the prototype human rather than Walid ibn Mughira. And it's as if their eyes come to that part and gloss over it, because once they've seen the passage of Walid ibn Mughira, their brain locks into, okay, well, that's what they're saying is the meaning, and they don't know how to read how these commentaries argue in the alternative, like saying, well, here's one view, but another view is, but they just don't know how to read that code. So yes, translations they do exactly what you said, in that they will constantly go back to asbab al-nuzul, but so many commentaries and are very skeptical about asbab al-nuzul, and because a lot of the asbab al-nuzul, a lot of the occasions of revelations are inconsistent and conflicting, and the asbab al-nuzul literature has a lot of issues surrounding it, and so a lot of commentaries will and also the other thing is that, for instance, a lot of commentators will have this discussion about how even if the Quran is addressing a particular person, the ways in which it should be read to apply beyond that person, but that discussion will take place in the context of a certain surah, that you need to know where that discussion will occur in order to understand the methodology of the tafsir itself. And that's why I think the problem in the modern age is not in the tafsir, but is in good teachers. I actually don't like people reading the books of tradition, because I think people don't understand the books of tradition. I think that there's such a huge difference between the just knowing Arabic doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, it just doesn't equip you to read books that were written hundreds. And in every other tradition, I mean, can you imagine if someone just thinks because they know English they can read texts written hundreds of years ago in English? I mean, only in Arabic you get that absurdity. Although no one is as weak linguistically as Arabs in terms of their own language. Arabs in particular have really lost their relationship with their language, so their ability to even read it. So I'm just I'm just careful about that. That I completely agree with you that pedagogically, when we teach our kids that, well, this was revealed about this person, and this was revealed about this person, we deny them a very important connector with the Quran. But that's us. That's not the tradition. That's the way we the way that translations are written, the way that people who stand up and teach in Islamic centers teach, even the way that governmental curriculums in Arab societies are written, which again, I mean, and you compare religion curricula that were written just 100 years ago and compare them to those written now, and you see the huge difference in sophistication. And so just 100 years ago, not even that long ago, what used to be taught in public school to Muslim Arab students was far more sophisticated than what is taught now. So for instance, for now, we strip, when we deal with the Quran, we take out everything related to all schools of thought except the most naqli, the most transmission-based, most literist-oriented. And I think that all contributed to the impoverishment of our relationship to the Quran. I mean,
I was reflecting on verse 6, وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ, and like the concept of fahjur, and then I don't want to like go into Muzammil, but I was thinking about part of Muzammil would use again ahjur as like ahjur jamilan, or you know. And so, and then I started thinking about the context of the verse generally of like that, and then the discussion you had regarding rujz versus rijis and this kind of thing, and I wondered what you thought, or if you've come across anything that kind of ties discussions and the concept of tawalla and tabarra to verse 6 in particular, and then as a whole, as part of the motif or the concept behind Muddaththir being that the Prophet in a sense had already began through his life in a state of tabarra or disassociation from the pagan idol worshipping kind of self-centered ways of life, and Muddaththir as like an allegory from of placing, you know, veils between himself and that which he knew was impure or you know, pagan or you know, self-centered, and then also but then having to also, when you put the veils, to not have the veils in front of you as you receive, you know, the divine intervention, and then what to do next, you know, how does one keep the veil against his community but also at the same time remove the veil. So I was wondering what you thought about, or if you've come across this kind of discussion regarding disassociation, association, and then this kind of like difficult binary of navigating the two.
Well, I don't.
Can you paraphrase the question?
I mean, the question is in the there's a lot of theological discussion on wala and bara, what things you as a Muslim may be connected to in life, and what things you should embrace, and what things you should disassociate from and distance yourself from. And then the Prophet ﷺ had effectively, before his prophecy, had already started this process that started from as early as we know, that of developing certain things in which he associated himself with, but also creating considerable distance between himself and so many of the social dynamics around him. And if the question, if I understood it correctly, is that whether there is a discussion about this whole notion of removing or emerging from a state of Al-Muddaththir, of the person who's removing one's veils and removing and reading and purifying oneself in the context of the relationship of wala and bara, what you associate with and what you disassociate with, and especially as to, because there's always this, you know, if you want to purify, but the challenge is, well, what in society do you engage, and what in society do you distance yourself from? and I don't remember reading a discussion about that in the context of Al-Muddaththir. I mean, in the context of many of the Quranic discourses on wala, on who you can embrace in life, there are extensive discussions. The interesting thing, of course, is that when we deal with the Prophet, is that his process of associating and disassociating from various institutions in society before revelation was done by his pure instinct, and just what his inner self told him is right and wrong. And so it is particularly significant because it in many ways it's a study in what a pure soul would know is right or wrong. So it does influence Muslim theologians considerably, that he always thought that gambling was wrong. And so when they talk about, what's known by revelation and what's known by intuition, that enters into it. Or that he always knew that going to the houses of prostitution was wrong. Or that he never drank alcohol, because he always thought that anything that intoxicates can't be right. Many other examples, there are discussions as to whether idol worship is wrong because God said so, or whether whether it is known by instinct that idol worship is wrong. So if you worship idols, should you have known that it was wrong, even if there was no revelation? Always in these discussions, they talk about the relationship of what the Prophet did or didn't do. So, in part, yes, you do find the precedent of the Prophet before revelation always present in these discussions, and however one analyzes it. But Surah Al-Muddaththir, it's really interesting because, the longest discussions of Surah Al-Muddaththir in the tradition, I can comfortably say that where you find like pages discussing Surah Al-Muddaththir are usually tafsirs of Sufi orientations. They consider it very, very significant, because it like deals with the very raw material, the building blocks. If you look at tafsir like Tafsir ibn Kathir, you'll find the tafsir on Surah Al-Muddaththir fairly short. It's like, it's nearly just telling you what the meanings of words are. And so you don't get the sense there's much to it beyond that. But I guess that's not that surprising, because Surah Al-Muddaththir it's either understood as basically a call to the Prophet of, okay, start your job now and let's pay attention, or it's understood as a full constitutional message to the early believers about what they need to do in order to build a proper Muslim character. Yeah, it's very interesting. But I mean, it's I want to underscore that remember the very early surah, like Surah Al-Muddaththir or Surah Al-Alaq, the symphonic brilliance of these surah, the way they combine a discourse on human nature, philosophy, with just pure literary music is amazing. It's just and then you really understand what the power of the beginning of Islam was all about. Why it grabbed the attention of so many people and why it began this whole unfolding that will change the face of life on earth.
Yeah, anybody else before we go to seconds? Did you want to? No?
This is a minor question. It's more related to the Arabic, but in verse 35 it says, إِنَّهَا لِأَحْدَى الْكُبَرِ. Is that, the one translation I have says that's referring to hell, another one says that it's not, and hell isn't actually in the Arabic. Mm-hmm. Are there other opinions that say that it could be referring to something else? Like maybe the signs or the Quran?
Yeah, no, it does. No, definitely. And in fact, even if you look at something like Tafsir Mawardi, who often will tell you like the many different points of view, he'll just list the different reports. So when it says إِنَّهَا لِأَحْدَى الْكُبَرِ, they'll tell you, well, one opinion is that it's hellfire, another opinion that it is the Quran itself. Let me see if he says others. Yeah, so one opinion is that it is hellfire, another opinion that it is the Quran, another opinion is that disbelieving Muhammad is the Ihda Kubar. Another opinion is that this ayah, this surah is Ihda Kubar. Final opinion that it is the hereafter that is the Ihda Kubar. Of course, yeah, there's I don't know if يا ابن المغلى نزلت إحدى الكبر داهية الدهر يصمى الغير, pre-Islamic poetry which uses that expression إحدى الكبر, and in this context إحدى الكبر means like the monumental turning event of life. So the Ihda Kubar was an expression in it was used in pre-Islamic poetry to refer to something that had nothing to do with hellfire, nothing to do with the hereafter, so it's just like a turning point. And a lot of people who, the theologians said, no, it refers to like this revelation is a turning point. It's like telling you, listen, Surah Al-Muddaththir, after Surah Al-Muddaththir, everything is going to be different now. Nothing is going to be the same.
Because in the ha, since it's feminine, that could be referring to plural non-human things, correct?
No.
So is it possible that it's referring to the signs that it just listed, the moon by the day, by the night?
Well, if it's Jahannam, it's feminine, so it could be. If it's As-Sa'a, it could be again Innaha. If it's the Surah, it could be Innaha.
Okay.
So you see, there's all of them. Could be inna. See if any people are awake.
I do have some questions from anyone else though here before we move to the next. Okay, so from the chat, what does it mean for an ego to defer to anyone but itself? Can you give an example?
Oh. You know, I always do this in my law school classes. I always say, how do we know anything about anything? And normally I don't get an answer right away. So I'll say, how do we know anything about history? How do we know anything about law? How do we know anything about anything? And you know, the answer is, someone told us so. If you're not willing to accept something that you read, something that you hear in class, you're not willing to accept a senior, senior whatever, a senior physician, a senior lawyer, you're going to have a problem. You're going to be an idiot. Because knowledge is based on transmission of claims about what happened in history, claims about what happened in scientific experiments. I mean, can you imagine if we insisted on, I will not believe anything unless I do the experiment myself? Good luck. We basically, our whole epistemological nature, our whole epistemological framework, our whole system of consciousness is built on these dynamics of trust, that I believe and so my starting point is X because I accept as my premises, my assumptions, so, you know, how do I know that Alexander the Great existed? How do I know that Thomas Jefferson existed? How do I know that the Federalist Papers were written by Americans? Maybe they were written by people from outer space. Maybe they were written by aliens. Maybe they were really written by the French, you know, camouflaging, pretending to be Americans. Maybe everything. You know, if you go down the road of maybe, it is deference. It is deference. You are always saying, well, you're always assessing, well, I trust this source, so I'm going to rely on what it tells me. Medicine is built on that, law is built on that, engineering is built on that, everything is built on that. Now, what happens when we come to a certain field and we say, well, I don't know anything unless I experience it myself? We normally do that when it is self-serving to do that. Not when it's logical to do that, when it's self-serving to do that. So we don't do it when it's something where our jobs depend on it, where we need to make a salary. We don't do it when it comes to being tested on an exam where we need to say certain things to get a good grade. We do that when we really don't want to defer. And the reasons that we don't want to defer, we don't want to be all that honest and express about it. So someone could sit here, for instance, listen to an entire halaqah about a surah, and they sit there and, well, I don't know that anything I've heard is true. Why? Is it because I don't have the degrees? No. Is it because I don't have the position? No. Is it don't have the authentication certification? No. But I just don't want to believe. Well, why don't you want to believe? Is it because I'm untrustworthy? Well, no. And when you get to it, it's not really in their best interest to believe, whatever it is. So that, however, it takes a certain powerful sense of transparency and honesty to be able to tell yourself, okay, you really don't want to believe because it is in your best interest. self-serving not to believe. Not because you have any legitimate rational reasons, but because your ego doesn't want to defer. So there are teachers that, I might want to defer to, and other teachers that don't want to defer to. If I'm a very honest person, I will be able to catch myself when it is for purely egotistical reasons. So, one teacher is in my camp, another teacher is not in my camp. Or one teacher is an Egyptian, another teacher is not an Egyptian. Or, the days when I was in Egypt. I don't know, all the silly reasons that people become polarized and tribal and whatever it is. That's what essentially is, that you scrutinize. Now especially for Sufis, a spiritual journey of irtiqa, of becoming elevated, is not possible without a teacher. And the first thing that you create with a teacher is trust. Sufis say, and not just Sufis but also Usulis, that if you don't trust, then don't study with someone. The idea that, well, I study with you but I half trust you, it goes nowhere. If you have trust, then don't study. You can't study with someone you don't trust. Now, that's not, of course, the way that our current educational systems are created. You don't study with mentors. But there is a lot to be said for the system of mentorship. I mean, we've seen what, and it's interesting because I've got to tell you, I mean, I've studied now Roman law with professors of Roman law, and I've studied Jewish law with professors of Jewish law, and I've studied Christian theology with prominent Christian theologians. And I've never seen a people who distrust their scholars as much as Muslims. But in part is because the system, the institutional system for credentialing Muslim scholars after colonialism has totally crumbled. So I would have a very hard time trusting a lot of people that are from Azhar, for instance. I mean, on moral grounds, on ethical grounds. Because of the system, the corrupt system of governance that controls Azhar, and the system of despotism and nepotism, and so I don't, so I mean, we are in a bit of a real catch-22, aren't we? On the one hand, in order for your ego to deflate, you need to be able to trust and defer. You can't be self-referential. If you're self-referential, then there's no hope. Your ego will never deflate. But on the other hand, our institutions of learning don't allow us to place much trust in people that we're asked to trust in. So we're forced to be very skeptical because our institutions of learning often appear like a joke, and they are a joke. Especially religious learning, which is sad because it's the most important learning. I mean, from experience, it's not the brightest and the smartest that go into the study of religion. It's usually often the the most dull and the most unintelligent, which is just, just really sad. It's unbelievable. It's affirmatively disastrous. I mean, how could we accept that when it comes to the study of Islam, it's the most dull and unintelligent minds are the ones that go into that field, and we just are fine with it. I mean, and how can we change that if those who go into the study of religion make the worst living? I don't know. I mean, I'm not providing any help, but yeah, it's a very distressing situation.
Okay, how does one cleanse his or herself from weaknesses, both those we are aware of and those we are not aware of? Say one prays and gives to the poor but still has weaknesses. Are there any specific guidelines to go about that in Islam?
Yes. Okay. I mean, it's a broad question, but there are some rules that that can help you a lot. Commit yourself to a principle of no harm. This is a principle in those who are trained as proper shuyukh, not a lot of the people who call themselves shuyukh in the West. You pretty much take an oath for the principle of la darar wa la dirar. You cannot commit harm. As you don't need to be a sheikh. La darar wa la dirar is from the Prophet ﷺ, and it is anchored in the Quran that you commit yourself, say, my moods will not be an excuse for me to harm someone. If I'm just in a bad mood, that's not going to be an excuse. My grievances are not going to be an excuse to harm someone. My jealousies, my mood swings, my anger, my temper, my whatever. If you commit yourself to, and it's not going to be a perfect score, obviously, but you're going to struggle with it. I am going to commit myself that I'm going to get on myself. If I am moody, if I am temperamental, if I lose my lose my temper, and that I will always go back and say no, reaffirm the commitment. And just because people are close to you or loved ones, it doesn't mean it's okay to hurt them. We often hurt those who are closest to us because we think it's okay. They can put up with it. No, that's wrong. And just because people are strangers, it's also not okay to hurt them. La darar wa la dirar, the Prophet ﷺ taught, it means exactly that. You can't hurt. You can't hurt. You can't hurt a human being. You can't hurt an animal. You can't hurt a tree. You can't hurt a flower. You can't hurt anything. That's the second major principle, is always ask yourself, when you find yourself in the seat of judgment towards others, always ask yourself very seriously, how does it feel to be them? First, it's very alien and it's weird, but then it gets easier and easier. This is what we call empathy. But it's exactly that when you are, starting down this, okay, I've decided someone is a jerk. I've decided someone is a loser. I've decided someone is an idiot. before you do that, pause and say, how does it feel to be them? Let me just go through the exercise of let me just take everything from their point of view and see the world from their eyes. If you do that, time after time after time, you'll see how much you will progress spiritually. You will see how much Allah comes to your aid. A promise, a guarantee, a warranty. You will see the blessings of Allah in your life. These are two keys that are the paths of the divine. They bring the blessings of the divine, because very few of us actually do them. A lot of us, say, yeah, we do them. But no. Really do them? No, we don't. Very few of us do them.
Okay. Earlier you shared about the number 19 question that you would ask a Sufi master to get a sense of where they are. I'm just going to paraphrase this question. Are there any other quote-unquote qualifying questions that might be asked to a Sufi leader in a tariqah? For example, before I would give bay'ah or commit to a prescribed number of repetitions of X, Y, or Z dhikr.
Oh, wow. I don't want to reveal the secrets of the trade. Okay, the reason I asked, of course, I wouldn't suggest that you do the 19 test because you have to know, why you're asking that and know the literature behind it and so on. But when it comes to in a Sufi tariqah or committing to a word, I honestly there are a few things, there are tariqahs that have been around for centuries and that have serious vetting processes for someone to be considered a serious member of the tariqah or a serious qutb in a tariqah. If they reach the qutb, that's a very high level. And so there is more guarantees and something like that. So if you're going to join the Rifa'iyya or Naqshbandiyya or Qalqashandiyya, or these are very well established tariqahs. So the key is to make sure that the sheikh that claims to be from a tariqah is actually from the tariqah. And most tariqah nowadays, they're pretty organized institutionally, so you can know whether someone in Britain or the US is actually has gone through the vetting processes of the tariqah. So that's one, because contrary to popular belief, for someone to say I represent a very well-known tariqah and to actually have the evidence for that, or to be a recognized representative of a tariqah from their headquarters, whether it's in Cyprus or in Egypt or in Syria or whatever, is a big deal. It's not something you attain easily. That's one thing. But then I am very a true Sufi sheikh, especially the Sufiya. You will find that those who flock around them they are, if you look at the life of that sheikh, you find it's a life of giving, not a life of taking. So unlike the Christian missionaries or whatever who live in palaces and so on, you find that they're just you know, they look at rational, objective indications. You know, are they? I wouldn't join a tariqah or a sheikh that seems to be oblivious to the feelings of women, who, you know, marries and divorces like they're consuming human beings. I wouldn't join a tariqah for a sheikh that is driven around in a Rolls Royce, or, you know, in an expensive, a really expensive car, and has an army of servants and protectors and guards, and, you know, some of the absurdities that one sees. I wouldn't join a tariqah where a sheikh seems to effectively treat themselves as a god, you know, agreeing to people, you know, doing things like collecting his, I don't know if you've seen stuff like that, but, you know, collecting the hair that falls off him, and collecting his sweat, and collecting his, I don't know what, and, you know, if he blows his nose in a Kleenex, people fight over it and preserve it, and these to me are just not what Sufism is about at all. Sufism is not about worshipping an individual. In fact, the true Sufi sheikhs, I mean, the ones that know what they're doing, they seem more human than human. And so quite often you wonder about how much they know, because they don't display it. And a lot of times it takes a long time to actually discover that they know a lot. They're you know, they're very conscious about how much they trouble people with their knowledge. So in other words, they're very sensitive people. Every Sufi sheikh that I've come to respect, I found them to be very genuinely caring, loving human beings. And everyone who has claimed to be a Sufi sheikh that I finally come to really disrespect, I found them to be very insensitive. So that's another thing to keep out from.
If the covering is to represent the veils of consciousness that we are to remove in order to establish a connection to the divine, are we to assume that the Prophet himself had veils to remove and moral insufficiencies requiring self-improvement?
That's a loaded question. When we get to Abasa and Tawalla, inshallah, we'll talk about whether the Prophet ﷺ was capable of or needed improvement. But remember that those who said that by the Quran talking to the Prophet, it's just talking to the Prophet and not people beyond the Prophet, they have a problem, because then they're confronted exactly with the question that you raised. When it says, you know, وَالرُّجْسَ فَهْجُرْ, what rujs or what rijs either? I mean, he didn't worship idols and he didn't commit rijs. But those who say that in fact like the quote that I read, that in fact you can direct your, so if I say to one of you, أيها قاعد قم, and I'm looking at, let's say, Grace, you know, all you who seated, get up, and I'm looking at Grace. In Arabic language, I could actually not be talking to Grace at all, but I'm talking to everyone who's sitting. But out of politeness, I'm looking at Grace. So I want to tell everyone else to get up, but I'm looking at Grace to not embarrass people. So if you know the Arabic language, you would get the message. Oh, okay, he's looking at Grace and he's saying, everyone seated, get up. Or, oh, who sits, sit, get up. So for that school, they said, it's actually, when it said purify and remove your veils, it's not talking to the Prophet at all, but talking to all those who are going to follow the Prophet. And that school doesn't have that problem. I believe, I'm from the second school. I don't think that when it said, when it talks to Al-Muddaththir, it was actually talking to the Prophet. I think it was talking to all those who are going to follow the Prophet. And the Quran often uses that style, where it sends messages to Muslims, but through addressing itself to the Prophet. And we'll see many examples of that, inshallah. If you believe, you know, yeah, I mean, I've heard, I mean, I've read those who said, well, you know, when it says, abandoned the worship of idols, it's just reminding him to keep doing what he's doing, but that's not very convincing. You know, unless it's addressing others, it's not very convincing.
Okay. Let me just check in. Anybody have any questions here? All right. So, actually, I got an email from someone who was in the session tonight, and she says this session was wonderful, and she wishes that she had asked this question. So I'm actually just going to ask it. So she's actually a former student that was a woman, you know, in law, a Pakistani woman in law, and she says that maybe she was too meek in her 20s, and she's emerging from that and finding some power and confidence now, and recognizes there must be a balance. How do we confront the enormity of our mission to bring a revolution while remaining humble? Should I believe that God chose for me some huge undertaking in that process? My problem is being out there, using my voice, writing talents, etc., when I'm afraid of being criticized or laughed at, etc. So probably in relation to the idea of removing the cloak and arising.
The power of our mission comes from the belief in our mission. In other words, it's like the Prophet ﷺ was known as a very humble and very shy person, but yet in conveying God's message, he was neither shy nor timid. I mean, and it took, what we would call considerable self-confidence to do a lot of the things he did. But that self-confidence, it didn't come from, who are you, Muhammad? It came from his belief in the mission that he's conveying. So, a lot of times, so that's one thing. But I want to comment about I got the sense from the question that there's a lack of confidence. Not the problem isn't arrogance, but a lack of confidence. Is that true?
I mean, I guess maybe the concern about criticism and being laughed at is an obstacle.
I mean, arrogant. I mean, normally arrogant people don't. They don't really care if they're going to be criticized, because they think anyone that criticizes them is an idiot, or normally, but some they're controlling the ego and humility, but at the same time having the confidence to go forward, is actually it's like being a balanced human being. So you trust in God, you look at yourself with a realistic assessment of your weaknesses and your powers. So when people point out a weakness, it doesn't surprise you, because you already confronted yourself with all the weaknesses. So when someone says some people criticize my pronunciation, I'm already criticized the way I pronounce things left and right. So no criticism really. I'm not threatened by laughter, because if they're gonna laugh at my mannerisms, that's one thing, and if that's the case, then all of us are funny. All of us are clowns, because all of us have weird mannerisms. No one is perfect. But anyone that laughs at my message, the message is not mine, and my belief that this message is from the truth, that is Allah, makes me immune to their laughter. They can laugh all they want. The confidence comes from the strength of the belief. Where control of the ego comes in, so I won't, for instance, go and run for Congress and become convinced that, of course, I'm going to be elected senator because I'm so wonderful, because I have a realistic view of my abilities. Sometimes I err on the side of maybe underestimating my abilities, but that's fine. I'd rather have it this way. But at the same time, I can't be, because that's a sin, to be unjust to yourself in ignoring the gifts that Allah has given you. So I can't, for example, go and call myself stupid, because if I do that, I feel like I'm insulting Allah's gifts to me. But I won't go around calling myself brilliant either, because then I feel I'm claiming something that I'm not entitled to. Who am I to make that type of call? If, of course, I don't know which student this is, but if you've gone to, this is a law student, right? If you graduated from law school, is it graduate or still in law school?
Okay.
Well, whether you graduated or you're going to graduate, I think you're pretty smart. And, I mean, of course, all my students are really smart. So, you're pretty intelligent. And people often, when they laugh because of their own insecurity and because they feel threatened. And especially when it comes to Muslims. I mean, a lot of the sneering and laughing directed at Muslims is racial and bigoted, and the fact that your authorization for what you say comes from Allah should give you confidence enough. And it doesn't sound to me, I mean, I might be wrong, but I'm not getting the sense about you, whoever you are, that you have an ego problem. It doesn't sound to me like your problem is arrogance. It might be your problem is lack of confidence, but I don't think your problem is arrogance. And Allahu A'lam.
Okay, last call. Okay.
Don't offer anymore.
Okay, thank you everyone for alhamdulillah. Thank you, Sheikh, for another incredible session. And we will hope to see everybody on Saturday, inshallah, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for next. What we're gonna do? Are we gonna do Muzammil, or are we gonna do something else?
No, we're gonna do another surah, not Muzammil, and Muzammil I'm gonna postpone to the Tuesday after.
Inshallah.
Because inshallah the surah on Saturday is going to be a prayer surah. Meaning the surah that is picked because of prayers. I don't know who's still online, but Assalamu alaikum. Goodbye,
Thank
everyone.
you for being with us.
Awake or asleep. If you're asleep, goodbye in your dreams. Hello, Adat.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum, Professor. Nice to meet you.
I miss you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Assalamu
Bye.
alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Bye bye.
يعطيك العافية.